I'm Ashton Addison from the Crypto Coin Show, and today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Nicolas Biagosch, co-initiator of Q Protocol. Nicolas, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here.
Likewise, excited to dive into Q Protocol and everything that the team and the foundation have been working on. I'd love to start off our conversation by sort of getting a high-level overview on what is Q Protocol and the functions that it serves, and then we can dive into all the details.
Sure. So Q Protocol is a decentralized governance layer for Web3, which allows for subjective or discretionary decision-making in a fully decentralized way. You can think about it the following way, maybe. So whatever we have in blockchain technology today is also sort of a governance framework where you have rules that are transparent, where you have enforcement of these rules, which is automatic, and where you have never have any disputes because those rules and whatever you can code is always binary. So it's always yes or no, if this, then that. The reason we started the Q Protocol was to say that we saw that in the blockchain space, because everything is codable and programmable, we are missing the opportunity to do anything that requires some kind of interpretation in a fully decentralized way. And we've seen that early on with things like the original Ethereum DAO hack or like the block size wars, where the only dispute resolution was just a social one. And that's okay. But as soon as you dive into or get into a little more sophisticated business models like we've seen in DeFi, system critical questions come up like what's an eligible asset to borrow against in a borrowing and lending scheme, like, for example, MakerDAO or and others. And there we saw that we're hitting a wall in that those questions require some kind of interpretation and cannot be coded. And then the outcome of that is either centralization or governance exploits like we've seen with, so many different ones. Mango DAO was a classic governance hack. That was a compound. Just recently, there was an attempt on that. So that is kind of the background why we have built a system that can not only do programmatic governance, but also subjective rules can be enforced and on-chain, and then that in a totally decentralized fashion.
Mm-hmm. That's a great intro, Nicolas, and I agree. Currently in DAOs and decentralized governance, there's sort of just like a yes/no vote, and what's the dispute resolution? Is it, if you accidentally vote the wrong thing, fork the whole chain and start over, something crazy like in Ethereum? There needs to be some kind of way to come to an agreement without having to say no, start over, say no, start over, and finally there comes to an agreement on that. So what are some of the parts of Q Protocol, on-chain and off-chain, that create this kind of subjective dispute resolution where people can come to agreements in a more efficient way?
Yeah. So I think it is important to understand governance is always requires three layers that are integrated with each other. This is rule setting, enforcement, and dispute resolution if you are going beyond just code as law or beyond anything that can be coded and requires some kind of interpretation. So one of the things that you could think about is in any kind of decentralized organization, a DAO, but also like all kinds of MakerDAO is a DAO, right? All kinds of decentralized organization. Simple things like spending rules or treasury spending and so forth, more likely than not require some kind of interpretation because it is impossible to determine all future stages of the world. We don't know unknowns, right? So that and like Q enables you to put down rules in a contract, like human written contract, which is a contract amongst all members of an organization. Then the Q protocol is able to take these rules like a referee, like a credibly neutral external governance security anchor, and enforce those rules. And when there are disputes, those disputes can then be taken to the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce Court of Arbitration, which is the biggest private arbitration organization in the world, and find a resolution there. There are also other means like integration with Clarus and others, but that's kind of the idea. One very important aspect of it is also, if you look at the space today, you might ask the question, why has DeFi not grown really since the first DeFi summer? And there is a fundamental systemic problem in the space, which is the governance tokens are designed to protect the TVL or whatever assets are in a treasury. So if you do this on like within every DAO themselves, this is different than you deal with transaction security. So transaction security, everybody uses either Ethereum or the layer ones or layer twos before the background of the idea of shared transaction security. It is more costly to corrupt a transaction than the benefit of the transaction is. The same must be true for governance, because otherwise you might have a treasury that's worth 100, but the value of the token, if it's below that, you have an immediate economic attack vector. And by taking this out and giving it to Q acts like a shared governance security anchor. So those are a couple of examples that show the benefit of having an external, credibly neutral, credibly fair governance security anchor.
No, those are great points, Nicolas. And having an international kind of resolution or court system, I feel like that's more up to date with the current standards. The way that it is right now, where everyone in blockchain at least is sort of working from different countries, and then we just decide, hey, it's all going to happen in this country, and people have to go across the world to resolve some dispute is very inefficient. So I could see how that will continue to grow. And your point on the Ethereum ecosystems, I'm curious on how the governance system of Q protocol, can that work on apps that are multi-chain or they're using different blockchains? Do they have to be under the Q protocol development, or can something on Ethereum also work with this kind of governance model?
Yeah. So the idea of Q is to be a governance layer that is available to anyone in the space. That could be applications on other layer ones, but also other layer ones themselves. Like for us, we have built Q as a layer one in order to achieve at least the same security like other layer ones. And the governance features that are available to others are being used within the protocol itself. Like, for example, when we do code upgrades, or those are being voted upon, and they are done in a way that is decentralized. We don't require any admin keys and whatnot, which is by the way, one of the reasons we have received regulatory clearance in Liechtenstein, because they asked, like, do you have any central entry points? And only when we could show how the Q protocol allows for decentralized code upgrades without any admin keys, then we received regulatory clearance. And that is available to others as well. So we do already have a couple of examples where a treasury or assets are on Ethereum or on Arbitrum, and then the DAO as such could be on Q, and then via cross-chain messaging, those assets can be put under what we call like treasury oversight, which is one of the governance features we're offering. ICP has just given us a grant in order to integrate with them for applications that have their treasuries or their assets or part of their technology on ICP, using that to then be still integrated with Q. So thinking about Q is more like thinking about a fundamental governance security layer rather than a layer one where everything just has to happen on that layer one. Yeah. And there are a couple of examples where we already, I think, Arbitrum and ICP are concrete ones which are integrating, and so that's the idea.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great approach, especially as these interchain protocols become more developed. They're going to want to have, the liquidity shared between protocols, hopefully, to, lower costs, make more efficient. The governance should be able to be on whichever protocol, like Q, is more focused on doing governance properly, and maybe that app is deployed on many, many chains moving forward. So I think it's a great approach. And I'm curious, though, as there are many Web3 projects right now that they really want to become a DAO. They don't know where to start and how hard it will be to set up governance properly, especially because companies are different sizes. Some of them, maybe they have a small team and a large community, or maybe there's unicorns already that have hundreds of employees and a more bureaucratic setup that has more things to manage in a DAO. How would these companies get started in using Q and setting up decentralized governance properly?
Yeah. So first of all, there is a little bit of tooling. It's called the DAO Factory. It is just an easy way to play around with it and try it out. So what we always try to explain is the most important thing is to start small as you can, because one of the biggest benefits of having the ability to have human written rules is to have very transparent processes on how to change those rules. So other than when you're coding, you don't have to understand the ultimate outcome of everything at the beginning. That's very important. It's a little bit a different approach for things. Like when you're coding a smart contract, you have to understand everything right from the beginning. What you can do in a DAO that you put on Q or where you use Q is you can start with a very minimal, we call it constitution, you can call it whatever you desire to call it. And that has a couple of fundamental things, or should have, which is like who are the members, how does it work, and then especially a way of changing this, because that way you are kind of securing the sustainability of your organization, because you don't know what will come your way. And then also you can design an organization that's maybe fairly centralized in the beginning, and parts of it are decentralized, and then you can move it into a more and more decentralized organization over time. We call those hybrid organizations. But always you will have like very transparently laid out how this works, which is also from a regulatory perspective, and I'm oversimplifying. This is not legal advice, obviously. But if I am oversimplifying, regulation looks at two things, amongst others. One is transparency, so that you can tick. And the other thing is centralization. Is there somebody who can run other people's money? So that's a big, big benefit. The other benefit is, and I think you touched upon it already, if you have then as another aspect an integration, like for dispute resolution, an integration with the ICC, given that the ICC is acknowledged by pretty much all relevant courts in the world, you form a legal entity that is beyond any legal entities acknowledged in nation states, but that also works beyond any region. So one of the things we're doing this for is because we thoroughly believe that a more digital, more decentralized ecosystem, like we're seeing it growing very fast at the moment, requires new kinds of infrastructure for governance, because otherwise, like, where do you put your DAO? Like, you put it in the United States, well, other people in the world that are part of your system will maybe say, like, why the States, or why Switzerland, or why China? You know, so there you can have a starting point that is independent of any region.
Well, that's really good to hear, especially for larger companies that have more centralized governance and they have to come up with a plan. They're thinking, we just have to flip a switch and all of a sudden, there's 1 million community members or stakeholders. How are they going to agree on anything? We need some kind of hybrid transition where, hey, we can start building decentralized governance for, these basic tools. And then as people get familiar, we can then release more of that centralized power one step at a time. Otherwise, I feel like starting from day one with 1 million community members with one vote, it's hard to agree upon something.
Very, very much so. And as I said, we call this hybrid models. The other element which we believe is very, very important is if you use a system like ours, you can and have the ability to put down those rules and have independent oversight. You can form, we call these expert panels, could call them sub-DAOs in the traditional world. This would be called like departments, where you can give a certain group of people, either centralized or decentralized, certain veto rights, certain decision-making powers, certain advisory rights, and so forth, and have them overseen by an independent entity. So that way, you can establish actual accountability, and you get out of this really problematic situation where everybody is asked to decide upon everything all the time, which then leads to voters fatigue. It leads to a phenomenon like we see in DAOs where not everybody's an expert on everything. So like the wisdom of the crowd, if you will, is really bad with those decisions that require domain expertise. So you can kind of outsource it, but still have an oversight mechanism that's effective.
Yeah, that's great to know, Nicolas. And yeah, you got to have expert panels or ways to identify the strengths in each person to, give them a little bit more influence into, hey, I've been studying this my whole life. I shouldn't have the same power to vote as somebody who just has $1 in and they don't really know what they're doing. So there's so many things to work out in a decentralized governance protocol. And I want to dive a little bit more into Q protocol itself. He talked about the security of the network, of the governance of the protocol. I know that also involves a QGOV token that helps bring security to the network and the governance. Can you talk about how that works in securing the actual protocol?
Yeah, so there are a couple of aspects. Like the Q token is the native asset of the protocol. It is used, this is a DPoS, EVM compatible layer 1. So it's used for staking and so forth. There's a second layer of nodes we call root nodes that are important for the enforcement functions. They are being rewarded, or their work is being rewarded in Q tokens. And then overall, what the Q token is important for is whenever there's an integration creation of a protocol using the governance features provided by the whole protocol, also involving token holders that are like the community, then governance fees are used as a reward for these features and for the benefit that has been created by Q protocol. Governance fees are very different from transaction fees, because in governance, it's not so important to have like many transactions, but the value of each transaction is very, very important. You could have one transaction with a lot of value behind. So governance fees tap into that value creation in that they are a percentage of the value that the governance of Q provides to whoever integrates with it. So like you might have a treasury protected by Q, and then a percentage of that treasury will be paid in rewards directly through the protocol, no centralized treasury in between, and go to all of the stakeholders that are actually running the protocol and making sure that the governance is secure. So that's one. So there's an actual value behind the protocol. It's not just speculation, but there's the actual value of whoever we create a benefit, like Q protocol creates a benefit. They part with some of that benefit, and it goes back to the protocol and is securing it. The other way is more like a security design feature where other protocols that or other layer ones are have like this one layer of either proof of work or proof of stake and other systems that needs to secure the whole system. With Q, we have that, just state of the art as pretty much anyone else. But then there's a second layer of full nodes, as I said, which we call root nodes, and they're completely independent of the validators. And they are themselves, again, overseen by the whole community and the ICC, and all of this works on the basis of the foundation, of the constitution. So essentially what you're doing when you're adding vertical layers that are independent of each other in securing like infrastructure design, you're adding, like with every layer, you're adding a huge amount of security above the other, because you would have to compromise all those layers at the same time. So you would not only have to compromise the validators, but also the root nodes, which can take out rogue validators, and then the whole community and the ICC in essentially, because the root nodes themselves are overseen. So all of this has to happen at the same time, which apparently is much harder than just looking at one layer and trying to corrupt this.
Yeah, no, that's it sounds like there's like a full revolving door of value going into the system, and then also when protocols are using Q, receiving value of the ecosystem. So if there is a startup that's using Q protocol for decentralized governance, then are they incentivized to become a validator or a staker as they start their governance? And then when they have proposals and people vote, they're actually receiving Q as well for successfully platform?
That's completely independent. So any like validate, and it's an open system. Anybody can become a validator. Root nodes is also an open system. Root nodes are being voted in by the community. So anybody can propose themselves to become a root node. And then the Q constitution in Annex 2 talks about what are the requirements to become a root node and so forth. It's all open to any, there's no, so you don't have to become a validator. And that's like the distribution of powers. It's very important that these things are completely separate from each other. you could do all of these things, but for example, you are a validator and a root node. There's obviously some kind of maybe like conflict of interest, which is not so bad. It's transparent, that's, then the community would probably ask for a lot more stake to put down as a root node in order to ensure the independence of that, or would just decide like, nah, we don't see that new root node to add to the independence of the root node layer, and I do not vote on it.
That makes sense as a decentralized governance platform, that it's more decentralized and you're not forced to participate in every part of the ecosystem, though if you want you could maximize value with each of those parts. So that's good to know. So if anybody, even if they're not participating in Q as one of the protocols that's using it and they're voting it, or maybe they're not a company, people are able to stake Q and get involved in the ecosystem, with sort of no barriers to entry.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're really promoting for anyone who's interested in this to become a part. What you do is you use Q tokens to then lock this in what we call the vault, which gives you voting rights, and then you can participate in the governance. And so right now there's a program out there, it's called Patron program, where we're incentivizing long-term activity. And then, as I said, you can combine it, but you don't have to combine it. And so that's definitely worth checking out on q.org. Because what we're really trying to do is to have like build a sustainable system. It's, the growth rate is long-term. That's what we're looking at. So that's why we're encouraging people to come in, try it out, and maybe stay a little longer and become really like an active part of the system, which is the core of what we do. I mean, we need unity to secure the system, to be active and a part of it.
And I agree, long-term sustainability is absolutely needed, especially because decentralized governance, we're really just at the very beginning of hopefully all organizations in the world transitioning to some level of decentralized governance, whether it's hybrid to start or full-on decentralized governance. And there's so much to be done. So I'm looking forward to seeing how decentralized governance grows and how Q protocol plays a part in that. And so you mentioned there about a incentive program or something on how can people get involved, or how can companies get involved? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's called the Patron program, and you can find it on q.org. And that is, if you have acquired Q tokens, you can either stake them or you can use them for governance participation and be rewarded for your engagement there. And so all the details can be found there. It's really easy to do, and definitely worth checking out, because it's a little bit of a first of its kind. And then go to the HQ, which is the D app, and you can see like all of the voting proposals and participate in those. It can be actually fun to do that.
That's awesome. And I saw that the Q token is also on MEXC exchange at the moment. Can you talk about that and sort of the plans for getting people in and out of the system, and how to make it easy and lower the barriers to entry for individuals and companies to get further involved with Q through the token?
Yeah, so I mean that's the idea behind having a liquid or tradable token. MEXC was the first exchange that the token was listed on, in order for people to have access to the system, which is always through the token. And yeah, because as I said, at the end of the day, like increasing the decentralization of the whole system is one of our biggest goals. And that requires for more and more people to actively work in the system, become a part of the community. The other side is, of course, to focus on more integrations and focus on more partnerships, and whoever wants to use the system to help them enter, explain what we can do, and so forth. So, and you know, we've seen a pretty nice growth in the community over the last months and years, but especially this year. And I'm just one guy helping out, and there are others as well, and it's a growing community. So I'm really excited to see what else will be coming, and there are partnerships like, as I said, ICP is one that decided to integrate with Q, and that's an amazing sign for the need for better and more sophisticated governance in the space. And maybe one thing that you mentioned, which I really do support, and I've heard it a lot in the community, where people are saying like, freedom always equals choice. Like you do have to have an alternative. And for many of these things in governance, we don't have an alternative to centralized systems today. So people are excited to become part of this and participate because they want to work on an alternative. And then whoever wants to set or needs to set up governance, they can decide, and that's ultimate freedom. It's like, I'm not saying everything will be decentralized. I'm even not, it's like everybody will have to make up their own minds, but today it's much harder to do that, as you mentioned, for decentralized organizations, because that they are missing fundamental infrastructure, which is available in the more traditional centralized world. And what Q, I think, is trying to do is provide an alternative that hopefully will be used more and more around the world, where people will say like, well, we can do this better because the world has become a more decentralized, more international, digital, global place. So yeah, I very much agree with what you said there.
Yeah, thank you, Nicolas. And I'm looking forward to more companies introducing decentralized governance and being able to contribute more, without having to just go to the annual stakeholders meeting, in these TradFi companies, which I'm sure eventually they'll start adopting this little by little. I like what you said about ICP, which is the Internet Computer Protocol, one of the major chains. It's great to see them also expanding their decentralized governance. I know they have crazy technology, and I feel like the Q infrastructure they would benefit greatly from each other. So I'm looking forward to that. What is the best way to follow along with those updates? I know you mentioned the Patron program. We can add that in the show notes. Is there any other information or gateways to learn more about this, and how else people and organizations can get involved?
Yeah, so I think q.org is a great starting point. You will find like blog posts. You will find all of the documentation that you might want to look at. You will find a link to some tooling like the HQ there that was built, and then Twitter, of course. That's Q blockchain on Twitter. And there's Discord. So like there are all kinds of entities. But I think q.org is a great starting point to then find out whatever there is. The beauty and the curse of governance is it allows for so many applications. So many times I'm being asked, so tell me about the killer application. And then I'm like, well, where do you want to start? Like AI, like governance of decentralized AI, because that centralized AI will require decentralized governance. AI can't govern itself. That I don't think would be a good idea. Or do you work with DeFi or real world assets, where you can build a bridge between real world situation and events, and then on-chain enforcement and so on. So you will find a lot of this on the website.
No, thank you so much, Nicolas. And it's the kind of infrastructure that's required in all types of decentralized applications. So it sort of applies to all of Web3 and eventually all of every organization in the world, as they realize they're missing the boat by not getting involved in the future of the internet and money and everything. So I'm looking forward to checking out more on Q as it grows. I appreciate your insights into the state of decentralized governance, where we're at and where it's heading. And I would love to have you and Q back on in the coming months or whenever there's another major update. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. It was a fun thing to be here. And as you can see, I love talking about decentralized governance, and great to be here. Thank you very much.